Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time to attend our presentation today. The Wasatch Debate League internship is a group consisting of high school students ranging from sophomores to seniors, dedicated to advocating for human rights. Working with these kids, I have the opportunity to get to know some really exceptional young people in this group, and they've been working tirelessly to prepare for today. We're all very excited to be addressing you at the Commission on the Status of Women, especially since we're from Utah, which has a history of advocating for women's rights. In fact, Sarah Young, the first woman to vote in the United States, was actually from Utah. We're grateful we have a chance to meet with all of you about an issue that threatens women's rights, and by extension, all human rights. We're excited to bring out our location's heritage, our research, and your minds to the issue we're presenting on today: the impact of pornography on human rights. So with that, we'll welcome our first speaker, Dallin Christensen.
Good afternoon. From the 1800s to the 1950s, people diagnosed with malaria, syphilis, or even a simple headache would often use something called Fowler's solution. It was designed to be a substitute to the patent medicine that was so common in that area, in that era of time, which was really just snake oil. It was ineffective and didn't actually solve the problems people were using it to solve. Fowler's solution grew in popularity and was used by many. But little did they know that Fowler's solution was just as, perhaps even more deadly than the ailments it purported to cure. Why? Arsenic. And as you likely know, arsenic has a rich history of being used as a deadly poison. But what you may not know is that in the eyes of history, arsenic is just as well known as a cure. In fact, arsenic was known for saving lives because it was so pervasive, perhaps even more than the things it was being used to cure. You see, Fowler's solution wasn't alone. Another medicine, Donovan's solution, was similar. It was created in Ireland to combine arsenic, mercury, and iodine to combat psoriasis, lepra, and lupus. In Chinese medicine, arsenic went by the name of fusang. Arsenic was known as both a poison and a cure to the Greeks and Romans. And in the early 1900s, before its widespread use, as a chemical weapon in World War I. Arsenic was the primary ingredient in a series of popular medicines, even cosmetics, and was often considered to be at the forefront of medical innovation. So what can we learn from this story, where we have something that's now known to be poisonous, now known to be dangerous, being used for its exact opposite purpose? What this shows is the value of caution. Despite arsenic's popularity as a cure, the notion seems almost laughable today. Arsenic's a well-known carcinogen and recognized today for the poison that it is. So today, as we present, we invite you to remember arsenic, because perhaps the only way to overcome the systematic bias that accompanies societal changes and shifts is to exercise caution. If we don't, we may too fall prey to an arsenic that supposedly saves us, but in reality is killing us. See, what we now see is that a cure may in reality be an unknown poison. So it's with arsenic in mind that we need to step back and address the topic that we're talking about today. How is it that pornography is pervasive in society, so that we can then understand how it impacts human rights? With that, we're going to gauge your understanding of pornography by doing a series of slides here. Each of these slides will be asking you a question. You can answer in your head or the chat box if you so wish about that question. What do you think is the answer? After that, we'll display the answer and you can see just how or how not pervasive pornography is in society today. So with that in mind, the first question: how many dollars a second are spent on internet pornography alone? Give you a second to think about that. All right, and the answer to that question is $3,075.64. And with that, we'll jump on to the next question. How many USBs of pornography or how many USBs could be filled with the pornographic content that is online? And if we lined all of those USBs up, how long would that chain be? Take a second to think about how long that could be, the amount of data that it would need to be stored. You can see the answer to that there. Enough porn was watched in 2016 alone that all the data could wrap around, it could fill 194 billion USB sticks. And if you put those USB sticks end to end, they'd wrap all the way around the moon. And we'll jump down to the next question here. As of 2017, how many hours of pornography were available on just one website, Pornhub? Give a second to think about that there. 1.5 million hours of video were available to stream on that website alone. If we were to tally up the hours of footage in years, that's more than 173 years of content. The last question here, how many videos were watched in 1 year on that same website, Pornhub alone? In 2016, 98,980,225,000 videos were watched on Pornhub. In 2018, that number jumps to more than 109,012,068,000. That's over 14 videos watched for every person on the entire planet. So clearly, this is demonstrating a widespread usage of pornography, even an obsession in some cases. So why is humanity obsessed with pornography? To answer that question, my friend Mirabella Archibald is going to present.
Why is humanity obsessed with pornography? The simple answer is they can't help it. And for good reason. Porn is convenient, it's fun, it's easily accessible, and caters to whatever you're feeling. It's a great way for youth to become comfortable with the idea of sex. It helps men and women understand what to do to achieve the greatest satisfaction possible in their sexual relations. It's easy, safe, and satisfying. Except that it isn't. Meet Steve. By all outward appearances, Steve seemed like he led a successful, balanced, and happy life. He had a stable marriage and owned his own business. But a dark secret was slowly consuming him. My world collapsed on June 30th, 2018. That's when my porn charges were discovered. Steve told journalist Daniel Van Boom during a Zoom meeting where he discussed how his marriage, his finances, and even his job were destroyed in a matter of months. Steve was obsessed with porn. On a light day, he would watch 2 to 3 hours of videos, often waiting until his wife fell asleep so he was free to consume porn content for the rest of the night. I would miss days of work. I would call in sick so that I could watch porn, he said. I would crave huge blocks of uninterrupted time, and like any good addict, I would scam ways to get it. Steve began spending, quote, an obscene amount on internet porn subscriptions and campsites. On June 30th, 2018, Steve's wife discovered that most of their finances were being put towards his huge subscription bills. By January 1st, 2019, just 6 months later, Steve found himself in the midst of a messy divorce, his business destroyed, his savings drained from his porn subscriptions, and his health completely ruined by spending his days consuming alcohol and porn, trying to cope with his shattered existence. Unfortunately, Steve's story is all too familiar. Hundreds and thousands of men and women just like Steve watch helpless as their relationships, hopes, and dreams slip through their fingers. It's hard to listen to stories like Steve's without noticing several concerning tendencies. First, that an excessive amount of time is spent in watching, viewing, or consuming porn at a much higher rate than the individual intended, accompanied by a persistent and uncontrollable desire to consume porn content. Second, that an excessive amount of time is lost in porn use or recovering from porn use, manifested in significant adverse impacts on social and occupational functions, harming relationships and resulting in neglected home, work, or educational responsibilities. Third, continued consumption of porn despite the presence of persistent or recurrent physical or psychological problems caused by porn or the related behaviors. Perhaps to those of you involved in health and medicinal fields, this list might sound familiar to you. That's because it comes straight out of the American Society of Addiction Medicine section on behavioral manifestations and complications of addiction, from their treatise on what defines addiction. Unsuccessful attempts to stop, impairment in social and occupational functioning, the presence of persistent and recurrent physical and psychological problems are all the side effects of addiction and of porn. What Steve didn't understand when he first started viewing porn, and what people across the world, from the first grader in school to the NFL football player in locker rooms, don't understand, is that porn is changing the very way their brain works. Why is humanity obsessed with pornography? Because humanity is addicted to pornography. The result of 55 neurological studies, accompanied by over 60 studies reporting escalation behaviors, confirm that pornography addictions are real and prevalent. Take a look at a study released by researchers Love, Lyer, Brand, Hatch, and Hale. In 2015, the researchers conducted and published a review of several studies exploring the neuroscience of internet pornography. What they found and reported is compelling. Studies examining the neuroimaging results of subjects who viewed internet pornography reveal brain region activation similar to craving and drug cue reactions for alcohol, cocaine, and nicotine. The study revealed that compulsive and consistent consumption of pornography stimulates the same powerful reaction in the brain as drug use. Pornography prevents the same problem as drug addictions. Further studies reveal even more compelling data. Dr. Valerie Voon is a global authority on addiction and the leading researcher in the neuroscience department at the prestigious University of Cambridge in England. In 2013, Dr. Voon released her groundbreaking study titled Neural Correlates of Sexual Cue Reactivity in Individuals with and Without Compulsive Sexual Behaviors. The study found strong evidence of sensitivization in compulsive porn users. As we can see in these images of the brain provided by Dr. Voon, porn addicts' ventral striatum is much larger than those of a healthy individual, causing them to be hyper-reactive. To put it simply, porn users become ultra-sensitive to things that trigger them, which then give them the seemingly uncontrollable urge to look at porn. This process is considered to be the main change in the brain when it comes to defining addiction. As Dr. Voon said about the study, there are clear differences in brain activity between patients who have compulsive sexual behavior and healthy volunteers. These differences mirror those of drug addicts. Pornography literally changes the way our brains work. Just like the reactions our brains have when taking drugs, when an individual views pornography, it sparks a peak in dopamine stimulus. The more an individual consumes pornography, the more it takes to spark that stimulus. A study of men who sought treatment for problematic pornography use showed that their brains had become so accustomed to pornography that they no longer had a chemical response to sexual images. However, though they were unable to be sexually aroused, they still craved that arousement, causing them to spend more and more time trying to finally get that dopamine hit. It is this destructive, addictive combination of physical urges without physical satisfaction that contributed to the downward spiral that ruined Steve's life and thousands of others. Pornography has been particularly linked to what the WHO has labeled compulsive sexual behavior disorder. This disorder is characterized by a persistent pattern of failure to control intense, repetitive sexual impulses or urges, resulting in repetitive sexual behavior. Symptoms may include repetitive sexual activities becoming a central focus of the person's life to the point of neglecting health and personal care or other interests, activities, and responsibilities. Numerous unsuccessful efforts to significantly reduce repetitive sexual behavior and continued repetitive sexual behavior despite adverse consequences or deriving little or no satisfaction from it. The pattern of failure to control intense sexual impulses or urges and resulting repetitive sexual behavior is manifested over an extended period of time, for example, 6 months or more, and causes marked distress or significant impairment in personal, family, social, educational, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Sound familiar? Yes. That was the exact pattern we saw earlier in Steve's story. Given the addictive nature of porn, it really should be no surprise that we find it pervasive across all facets of society. Once exposed to porn, it's hard to turn back. It's even harder to keep porn consumption in a healthy realm. It's time to start asking the difficult questions. In a society that views porn as something that is helpful and even healthy, and especially with the level of pervasion by pornography, it's important to ask, what are the effects of this on me? And not only that, but also, what are the effects of this on society as a whole? And even more importantly, how can individuals behave responsibly with such a crucial issue? We will examine each of these questions in our presentation today, beginning with my friend Peter Hyde, who will tell you about how pornography affects us and our mental health.
Thank you, Marabella. Now let's actually go back to the first question that you asked, and that is, what are the effects of this on me? Now, to start to answer that, let's examine the connection between pornography and an increase in the prevalence of mental health issues, in particular, depression and anxiety. But first, it's important to understand the dangers of this by understanding the effects that these mental illnesses can have. For example, depression is a major problem for our world, which millions of individuals struggle with daily, including a man named Kushbu. And while describing the debilitating effects that depression had on his life, he said that it, quote, started with feeling irritated over small issues. I didn't look forward to spending time with my baby. My in-laws would make me lose my nerve. And for no reason at all, I was getting angry at home. Even in the office, I didn't feel like working anymore. I was losing enthusiasm for life and struggling to enjoy the things that would usually make me happy. According to the WHO, depression is a leading cause of disability worldwide and is a major contributor to the overall global burden of disease. We've all experienced sadness at some point in our lives. But what many of us do not have to experience is a persistent, constant feeling of sadness. Do we want anybody to live like this? Especially when depression is something that threatens life itself, seeing as it's found to be the cause of 5 to 8% of all suicides. Now, in just a moment, we'll examine the connection between depression and pornography. But first, let's examine the impact of another mental illness that we will see also has a connection to pornography, and that's anxiety. According to the Mayo Clinic, anxiety is, quote, intense, excessive, and persistent worry and fear about everyday situations. Last year, on July 29th, a woman named Erin said that having anxiety has impacted a lot of areas of my life, but it has especially affected my ability to cope with tasks that are to many people mundane and everyday, close quote. While not all instances are as severe as Erin's, it's still an issue that we need to try our best to limit. I'm sure we can all agree that the less anxiety in the world, the better. And if history has taught us anything, then it's the importance of recognizing problems and then dealing with them head on. After recognizing things such as depression and anxiety as things we must combat, we next have to ask ourselves, how can we do this? Because this is a problem that we must face and do all we can to prevent its spread. An essential factor in raising the standard of human life and human rights is decreasing the amount of depression in the world. But pornography is opposing us in that battle. A key step in understanding the effects of pornography is understanding how it affects personal outlook. And there have been many connections made between the use of pornography and an increase in depression rates. So let's take a look at those connections now. According to Medical News Today, quote, a 2019 study found that excessive pornography use increased the rate of depression in both men and women. And a 2017 study that surveyed 582 senior male students found that 14.6% of those who used pornography more than 3 times per week reported experiencing depression, compared with 2.8% of individuals who reported using pornography less than once per week. This is an almost 12% difference, and it's a harmful one. Harmful to the individuals that it affects. Now, you may be saying to yourself, oh, this is merely a correlation. This isn't strictly causation. And it's true that preliminary facts and data cannot fully confirm causation. However, what the evidence from Medical News Today demonstrates is at the very least a correlation between pornography and mental illness. And research published by the journal Psychology of Addictive Behaviors sheds even more light on the dangers still involved. Now, this research found that pornography itself is not the only direct thing that affects our mental health, but also how we perceive our own use of pornography that seems linked to how we think and feel negatively about ourselves. Particularly, feeling addicted to online pornography is associated with depression, anger, and anxiety. The researchers suggest that it is the addictive nature and sense that we are out of control that can also lead to mental health disorders. Now, as Ms. Marabella demonstrated earlier, pornography is highly addicting, and it's that addiction itself that can also lead to greater suffering. Mental illness is a problem underlying society that shows no sign of going away, and that's even without being exacerbated by things such as pornography. As we learned today, there is a strong connection between pornography and mental illness. But let's learn more about that by hearing a story found on the website Fight the New Drug of an individual and his struggle with pornography and depression. He said, quote, I was first exposed to porn at the age of 11 in 2002. I became hooked on it, and as time progressed, access became easier. But a strange trend followed me as well. Depression. My depression started around the same time span, but for the longest time, I never correlated the two. I would watch. The porn made me feel so disconnected and ashamed that I didn't want to be around anyone, but instead just dwell in the garbage that I watched. Porn made me feel less human, but I kept coming back to it. It was my drug that gave me false pleasure. I would watch porn for about 5 minutes and then just feel like dirt for the rest of the day, and sometimes the week. This pattern continued all the way up to 2011 when I decided to start cleaning myself up from porn, because my depression got to the point of suicidal thoughts and tendencies. I went a solid 6 months without watching porn, and I noticed how my depression was absent as well. I felt happier. Life seemed very enjoyable, and I felt connected to the people around me. While before, porn had caused me to feel dehumanized to society. I battled being on and off and on again with porn until 2013, when I truly made a breakthrough and went a full year without seeing it. Even to this day, I have not viewed a single porn image or video. Since that day of October 24th, 2013, my depression has not shown up once in my life. I've surrounded myself with people who remind me that I don't need porn to find happiness or pleasure. Close quote. Now, this story is just one demonstration of the powerful effects of pornography. The connection between pornography and mental health is one that is important to recognize and research. We cannot cure the world of depression and anxiety and addiction if we do not understand its link to pornography. While the damages to mental health that pornography connects to are serious, it's just one of the aspects of harm that pornography leads to. And in just a moment, Miles Pack will come up here and talk to you about another one of those harms, and that is the damage done to relationships.
A lasting, healthy relationship is one built on principles: trust, honesty, transparency, patience, connection, and love. Such principles are vital for any relationship to flourish and also help create healthy attachments and connections. However, pornography is an active pursuit to destroy all of these. Every relationship needs connections to keep them together. And without a strong connections, our relationships can easily drift apart. Many of our day-to-day connections are being severely damaged by porn. The list goes as follows. Time. When people view pornography, they isolate themselves, reducing family time or time doing things that they enjoy. This causes stress on the family. If you're spending every spare second of the day viewing porn rather than spending time with your family, developing your skills and hobbies, or doing things that you enjoy, then your level of happiness will decrease, as well as those connections you've been developing in any given relationship. Time spent feeding an addiction is time not spent strengthening relationships with friends, family, or your significant other. As a result, those relationships become damaged, making addicts feel isolated, and then making the addiction worse as they thrust themselves into the drug of porn to make up for that loneliness. Second, anger. Using pornography increases the likelihood of you getting angry and into arguments. J.K. Emezi, a certified addiction recovery professional specializing in sex and pornography addiction, said, quote, "Over the years, research has increasingly shed light on the negative effects of pornography on the consumer's brain, their relationship, and our society. However, there is one common effect of porn on relationships that is rarely mentioned, and that is the connection between pornography and anger." He continues to say that after 6 years and over 300 individuals struggling with porn, one common struggle that always comes up when involved in the addiction is anger. Whether you're feeling shameful, disappointed, blame, discontentment, or you feel like your partner's just getting in the way. Now, these are all side effects from viewing pornography. The results of many of these different arguments and in many different circumstances can lead to an increasing number of divorce. Third, divorce. We have all heard about or experienced the devastating impact pornography has had on individuals, but its fallout on the entire family groups is quite alarming. Researchers completed a major study of pornography, concluding that it is, quote unquote, a quiet family killer. The report found that 56% of all divorces that occur is because one partner has an obsessive interest in pornography. Now, with current divorce rates, that suggests that pornography ends just under 500,000 marriages each year. These numbers represent a staggering number of homes broken by pornography, and that extends beyond ruined adult relationships and into the lives of our sensitive, developing children. Beyond a doubt, experts conclude that parents' pornography's consumption negatively affects children directly and indirectly. Fourth, dissatisfaction. Pornography tends to change what looks good to men and women. Wives generally feel self-conscious and feel that they aren't good enough for their spouse, while husbands become dissatisfied with their wives because they have some skewed idea of what is actually real. Dr. Wesley Riley of Debt to Life said, quote, "The drug addict craves more, but the sexual addict craves different." In other words, a heroin addict wants more heroin, but a sex addict doesn't just want more sex. They want different sex. The deception is that different will satisfy you. But of course, once you have what you've craved, you will always want something more and something different, and this process never ends. Next, insecurity. Perhaps the biggest victim of a man's porn usage is his wife, realizing that her husband is spending countless hours looking at other women and avoiding her. This can be emotionally crushing. BJ Foster, director of content creation for All Pro Dad, explained, quote, "A husband's porn use validates all the negative things his wife thinks about herself. If only she looked different, lost weight, was blonde, sexy, wore better clothes, or fit into the right size." Now, these are all things that flood her brain and, most importantly, her heart. Ultimately, she feels like she is not good enough, and this can be really damaging in a relationship and can cause a significant amount more divorce. Next, emotional detachment. Frequent porn use can also cause users to emotionally detach themselves from their partners. Michael Taylor, a marriage and family therapist in Kentucky, agrees with this, saying, quote, "Pornography is a poor substitute for the bonding version of sex. The vulnerability is removed in pornography, and that makes it too simplistic to produce the security and bonding that are a significant part of the physical interaction of a couple," close quote. In most extreme cases, porn can separate the user from their partner, both in terms of time and emotions. The resulting emotional detachment from sex is a very dangerous thing in the viability of a marriage. And lastly, secrecy. In most cases, the person looking at the porn doesn't really want their partner to know. The secrecy, shame, isolation, lies, and a kind of sneaking around initiates itself in all different kinds of problems in a relationship. Keeping secrets from your partner is a recipe for disaster. When romantic partners keep secrets from each other, their trust in each other erodes and their confidence in their relationship starts to waver. This in turn can negatively affect your relationship. But even if porn isn't kept a secret, even if partners are open and honest about their consumption, it is still a real harm. In sum, pornography damages our connections through time, anger, divorce, dissatisfaction, insecurity, emotional attachment, secrecy, and much, much more that we didn't even go over in this presentation. Principles of trust, honesty, transparency, patience, connection, and love all play a huge role in every relationship. Families and relationships are in every society. They are beneficial and crucial to every society. But the sweeping threat of pornography damages any and all types of relationships. Many relationships are damaged every day, and in several circumstances, it comes from pornography. Now we will hear from Dallin Christensen, and he will come up and talk about how pornography perpetuates dangerous misconceptions about sex and sexuality.
Not only does pornography have an impact on relationships and lead to mentalities and mindsets such as depression, like we've talked over at this point, it also leads to dangerous misconceptions about sex and sexuality. The truth is, our world is becoming increasingly more virtualized. Many of you probably experienced that during the COVID-19 pandemic. Consider that in the 1970s, the average child in the United States of America began to watch television regularly at the age of 4. Yet today, children begin to interact with digital media at the age of 4 months. And as countries around the world are developing, we see similar trends in the increase of technological use at younger and younger ages. While the internet has provided vast opportunities for enhanced communications, research, and information, even what we're doing right now, there are drawbacks, especially for the children and youth of our generation. With the world at their fingertips, children have a wealth of information available to them at all times. They can learn anything from ballet to pottery, but unfortunately, it can also teach them about other things, more unsavory information in contexts that are inappropriate. Countless studies have shown us that children are being exposed to pornography as early as elementary school, and sometimes as early as the age of 5, the average age of exposure being only 11 years old. Given this age range that we're seeing, it's clear that many children are not even aware that what they're being exposed to is real or not real. They don't understand if it's realistic or not. And because of that, it's their introduction to the topic of sex. Consider the following study. Public health researchers Emily F. Rothman, Courtney Kosmarski, Nina Burke, Emily Jansen, and Allison Bauman wanted to discover first, what types of pornography youth ages 16 to 18 reported watching, where they watched it, and for what purpose, and second, did the youth feel that pornography exposure has an impact on their own sexual behaviors? What they discovered was interesting. First, pornography exposure among youth was incredibly widespread. The data indicated that 23% of US youth ages 10 to 15 years old have purposely sought out sexually explicit material in the past year. And again, we see that comparably as nations develop and become to have internet access similar to that of the United States, they begin to have similar rates of these same behaviors. By the time US youth are aged 14 years old, a study done by Brown and Liagel in 2009 found that 66% of males and 39% of females have viewed either print, film, or internet pornography at least once in the past year, either on purpose or incidentally. Furthermore, almost every participant reported learning how to have sex because of what they watched on pornography. Whether it was the different sexual positions that they learned, what they thought other people would be interested in based off of pornography, or even extreme sex acts that they began to believe were realistic because of what they watched on pornography. Pornography became the primary means of sex education for many of these people. Most compelling of all, both males and females reported pornography was how they learned what sex even was. An 18-year-old female reported, "Without porn, I wouldn't even know half the things I know now." The data is undeniable in this particular branch that for most children and youth, pornography is their main source of sex education when internet pornography is accessible. And while some people praise this as a developing part of the world and a better way to do things, it creates a concern that we have to be very cautious about. That's because pornography is not designed to be a source of education. Unlike health classes that people have at school or what people learn in the home, pornography is not teaching children about how to protect themselves from AIDS or other STDs. It's not teaching them about the reality of teen pregnancies. It doesn't teach them the reality of consent. It doesn't teach them the reality of healthy sexual practices. it just doesn't teach them about reality. It's because pornography isn't designed to teach, it's designed to entertain. It's fast-paced, dramatic, and most of all, unrealistic. You have to keep in mind that porn is a product. According to various reports, currently the porn industry's net worth is about 97 billion US dollars. That's enough money to feed at least 4.8 billion people a day. The porn industry makes more than a Major League Baseball team in the United States, the NFL, National Football League in the United States, and the NBA, National Basketball Association, combined. Obviously, porn producers have a lot to gain, billions of dollars, by garnering views. So they do exactly what everyone else does in a business situation. They dress up their product to grab your attention and pull you in. Professional porn performers have a whole team of people to make every detail look perfect, from directing and filming to lighting and makeup, maybe even plastic surgery in often cases. With some careful editing, a typical 45-minute porn flick that took 3 days to shoot can appear to have happened all at once without break. Film the right bodies from the right angles at the right moments, edit out all the mistakes, Photoshop away any imperfections, add a catchy soundtrack, and you have something that is most definitely not real to life, and certainly not a source of accurate information. But the problem doesn't stop there. What sells isn't just inaccurate, but oftentimes dangerous. See, a study that reviewed 4,009 scenes from 2 major free pornographic tube sites, that's Pornhub and Xvideos, sought to provide insight into the content of pornographic videos on these sites. Overall, 45% of Pornhub scenes included at least one act of physical aggression, while 35% of scenes from Xvideos contained aggression. Aggression included spanking, gagging, slapping, hair pulling, and choking as the 5 most common forms of physical aggression. Most prevalent to the topic of our conference today was where this aggression was coming from and who it was being given to. In 97% of those scenes, women were the subject of that aggression. And most disturbing was how they responded to that aggression. Shockingly, in all these cases, the response from the women in these scenes was not negative, but in fact positive or neutral. What this is demonstrating is that pornography is demonstrating something quite unreal to life, because in reality, that same aggression would be met with hurt feelings, situation needing resolution, and something entirely different from what we're seeing in these situations. The study went on to find that men were the perpetrators of aggression against women in 76% of those scenes, and finally concluded that aggression is most common against women in online pornography, while repercussions to this aggression are rarely, if ever, portrayed. So while these extreme forms of porn are considered adult, youth have certainly begun to take access and use pornography. With such graphic and disturbing material being viewed by the youth of today, it should come as no surprise that pornography perpetuates dangerous misconceptions about sex and sexuality. Learning about sex from porn is like taking a health class from a tobacco company. The information would obviously be completely warped, if not downright false, because the goal of that organization or industry is entirely inconsistent with your goal in going to them to learn. The misconceptions you would develop could affect you for the rest of your life. And that's exactly what we see happening with youth exposed to pornography. Adolescents are particularly susceptible to being influenced by pornography because they are relatively sexually inexperienced. They're still developing their sexual identities, and because the teen years are a biologically based critical period of development, according to Peter and Valkenburg in 2011, Foss et al. In 2012, and Sankovic, Stolfer, and Bozic in 2013, there's a clear connection between viewing pornography as youth and developing sexually aggressive behavior. A number of studies have found exposure to porn is associated with a higher number of overall and casual sexual partners, online sexual harassment, earlier age of sexual debut, less sexual and relationship satisfaction, and sexually permissive attitudes. Unfortunately, these studies found pornography mainly funnels into one incredibly dangerous misconception: a tendency to view women as sexual objects. And my friend Mirabella is going to tell us exactly how pornography portrays this particular misconception.
Another one of the harmful views promulgated by pornography are the views of women being subjected to men's desires and the objectification of women, which brings us to the fifth impact of pornography on individuals. Pornography objectifies people, women in particular. While we're meeting at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, this point has a particularly sharp edge. The way pornography portrays sexual relations robs actors of the same human dignity that the United Nations and each one of us fight for. It does this by portraying a false reality. Pornography isn't interested in the reality of healthy sexual relations and instead shows what sells. Submissive women, impossible scenarios, and women as the subject of violence. A competitive market means that pornographers are trying to outdo each other to come up with the most extreme images, explains Dr. John Wood, a therapist who works with youth addicted to pornography. This contest to push the boundaries means that straight intercourse is considered too boring. Images of brutal sex and women being humiliated and degraded by two or more men at any one time are the new norms. So why is this so dangerous? It's because pornography isn't portraying reality. One of the ways that pornography is so unrealistic and harmful is the portrayal of violence. In pornographic scenes, men are violent to women and not the other way around. Dallin discussed evidence about this from the July 2020 study by Indiana University of Bloomington's board, analyzing data from 4,009 heterosexual pornographic films from Pornhub and X videos that looked at violence, its consequences, and gender roles in those videos. Like he said, the study found that women were the target of aggression in 97% of the violent scenes. Continuing with that, men were the perpetrators of aggression against women in 76% of scenes. This shows an overwhelming issue of gender roles in pornographic portrayals. In real life, violence is met with hurt feelings, pain, and situations that demand resolution. This natural chain of action to consequence is what results in changed behavior. Unfortunately, that's not what sells. And so it isn't portrayed in pornography. The study also found that the response to violence was either neutral or positive, rarely showing a negative reaction on screen. This begs the question, what is the impact of pornography's slated portrayal of violence? Eventually, people become what they consume. After viewing pornography for long enough, people believe it's real and begin to implement that behavior in their own lives. There isn't a proper understanding of whether or not pornography is realistic. A great example of this can be found from the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty for Children and the Children's Commissioner for England. They did a study to gather information on and understand the perceptions and experiences of youth and children with pornographic material that would only be legal for those over the age of 18 in the UK. The study found that of the group of participants who answered the questions, 53% of boys and 39% of girls reported that pornography was realistic. It's important to keep in mind that this group is all underage and hasn't been able to experience any of the things pornography depicts for themselves. Pornography is teaching them what sex looks like, and they don't have any way of knowing what is and isn't real. As discussed earlier, the average age of exposure to pornography is as young as 11 years old. By the time youth are age 14, it's almost certain that they will have viewed some form of pornography. Oftentimes, this first exposure to intimacy is taken at face value as realistic. After all, how would they know any better? The unfortunate consequences is that people, especially women, feel that they need to perform as porn stars in their sexual intercourses. This expectation is especially dangerous when pornography portrays unsafe sex, aggression, and objectification as the norm. When men are violent in pornography and women respond positively or neutrally, this teaches viewers that women are submissive, rather than showing healthy dialogue about women. Pornography shows them as a tool for the sexual pleasure of men. It's accepted for men to beat, harass, physically and verbally abuse women. In fact, according to pornography, women enjoy such treatment. Nothing could be further from the ideals the United Nations upholds. One interesting theory on objectification was the animalization theory pursued by the Yale researching team headed by Joshua Knobe. The study showed participants 3 different images of women: a clothed woman, a naked woman, and a partially clothed woman in an outfit classified as sexually focused. Participants were asked to rate the level of agency and the level of experience of the person in each image. Agency was broken into judge the degree to which she was capable of self-control, planning, and acting morally. Experience was broken down into the degree to which she was capable of feeling fear, feeling desire, and feeling pleasure. The results of the study found that an increase in the sexual nature of the image decreased the perception of agency and increased the perception of impulsivity. In short, rather than viewing people in pornography as an object purely like a table or a hammer, they're seen more like an animal, capable of feeling emotion but not deserving of dignity. This study isn't the only one with this finding. Studies of this nature have been repeated to the same finding. This is well represented in the 2019 study cited in the United States Library of Medicine's finding that, quote, previous research finds that both men and women perceived sexualized women as lacking in certain human qualities such as mental capacity and moral status. Can we truly accept this mindset to be safe? It was this same dehumanizing mindset that perpetuated the greatest crimes against humanity throughout history. Genocide, slavery, torture all begin with the belief that the other person is not worthy of basic rights. Repeatedly, history has demonstrated that a belief that another person is less than human is the beginning of abuse and rights violations. Looking at others as less than human is an angle that has been explored in philosophy and the duty of humanity by philosophers for centuries. A prominent example of this is philosopher Immanuel Kant. The universal theory he proposed has one important point I would like to address. He claims that a universal theorem justifying ethics is that all people must not be treated as means to ends, the very definition of objectification. This is consistent with the construct of human rights we fight for at the United Nations. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, quote, that all human beings are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Pornography violates this by spreading a mindset where people are not possessing of reason or conscience. Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that no one should be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. But again, pornography is contrary to this. By treating people as less than human, pornography degrades their humanity, public perception of their rights, and eventually the way they're treated. Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Yet again, pornography promotes a mindset contrary to this goal. The 5th Sustainable Development Goal of the United Nations is to promote gender equality. But again, Pornography thwarts the efforts of the United Nations. Time and time again, pornography undermines the United Nations international goals. Because in pornography, people aren't viewed as people. They're simply viewed as a means to an end, a form of temporary pleasure and release. As we strive to promote gender equality, to establish humanity under law, to prohibit degrading treatment, to recognize the humanity of every human around us, we cannot overlook the plaguing impacts of pornography. As the issue grows, it becomes interconnected to other alarming industries. My friend Miles Pack will present information on this issue.
Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry worldwide. Now, to get a glimpse of how much money that is, it's enough money to buy the entire Starbucks franchise, every team in the National Basketball Association, and still have enough money to send every kid in the United States to college. Human trafficking is a big problem in our society, and it happens on a day-to-day basis. Just recently, the body of 17-year-old Michaela Mitchell of Sherman, Texas, was found in a Dallas pond. Last summer, Michaela was kidnapped in West Texas, and investigators now believe that she was being sold for sex. When she tried to escape, her captors responded with subhuman violence. The heartbreaking story of Michaela Mitchell is but one example of the thousands of American children who are being forced into a modern-day underground sex trade by a growing network of violent sexual predators. But where did this behavior come from? And why is the trafficking industry so large? The answer to those questions is pornography. But before we can talk about how pornography drives the demand of these sex traffickers, we must first identify the term sex trafficking. What is sex trafficking? The legal definitions of it can get pretty technical, but sex trafficking is a type of human trafficking. And human trafficking is exactly how it sounds, trafficking in humans. If trafficking means buying and selling things or moving things around so that they can be used for profit, then human trafficking means buying or selling humans and moving humans around so that they can be used for profit. This tells us that sex trafficking doesn't even actually require kidnapping or threats of violence for it to be considered trafficking. In fact, according to the United Nations definition of human trafficking, it doesn't even matter whether a victim says no. The consent of the trafficked person becomes irrelevant whenever any means of trafficking are used: coercion, fraud, threats of force, etc. Basically, another word you could use for trafficking is slavery, because the legal definition of slavery is the state of being under control of someone to which a person is forced to work for another. Now, in a worldwide view of slavery, society generally agrees that it is humane and degrading, and most people are astonished that there have been times in history where slavery was accepted as normal. But somehow still many people are accepting a form of modern-day slavery. This is human sex trafficking. And while many people claim to be opposed to human sex trafficking, what many don't know is the demand for human sex trafficking is fueled by pornography and the porn industry. Today, we live in a world that needs to see concrete numbers to legitimize an issue. Unfortunately, since the sex trafficking and sexual exploitation are underground businesses, those numbers are hard to come by. But a lot of what we do know about the current state of the industry comes from survivors. And they have a lot to say about how porn has been largely affected or included in their trafficking and exploitation. In fact, according to a report the Whisper Oral History Project, 80% of survivors reported that traffickers showed them pornography to illustrate the kinds of sexual acts they wanted to perform. Catherine McKinnon, a professor at Harvard Law School, says, quote, "Consuming pornography is an experience of bought sex, and thus it creates a hunger to continue to purchase, objectify, and act out what is seen," close quote. And in a very literal way, pornography is advertising for trafficking, not just in general, but also in the sense that traffickers use pornographic images of victims as specific advertising for their products. In addition, viewing pornography and gratifying oneself with it creates a drug-like addiction, which distorts the individual's view on sexuality and also trains the mind to expect sexual fulfillment on demand. It also fuels people to continually to seek more explicit and violent content to create that same high. But what's the biggest and most surprising connection between pornography and sex trafficking? It's actually that they are often the same exact thing. Now, we can spend hours and hours pointing out the cause and effect, the symbiotic relationships between trafficking and porn. And those connections are real and are an important conversation to have, but let's not allow that to entrench the idea that porn and sex trafficking are always separate. Far more often than most people realize, they're not. In fact, even if the victim does register their distress, it is impossible to know because rape and abuse-themed porn have now become mainstream. One female survivor whose captor slept on top of her at night so she wouldn't escape, watched her through a hole while she went to the bathroom, and listened to her phone calls with a gun pointed at her head, was forced to appear in a video that made the Sinclair Intimacy Institute's list of sex-positive productions. She quotes, "Every time someone watches that film, they are watching me being raped." Other examples include that in July of 2007 issue of Taboo, a publication owned by Hustler, it featured a multi-page feature of a young woman being held prisoner and severely sexually abused by her captors. They took photos and videos of her and sold them as porn. In another case, a Miami jury convicted 2 men of luring women to Florida to audition for modeling jobs, drugging them, filming them being raped, and selling the footage as porn online and stores across the United States. Many people believe that when they view porn, they're viewing consented porn. But the word consent is a slippery word in the world of porn. And of all the ways that pornography and sex trafficking overlap, the darkest, most surprising secret of all might be this: that even in the production of mainstream porn, sex trafficking is a regular occurrence. Remember, it doesn't even require kidnapping or threats of violence. All it requires is coercion. Quote, "I was threatened that if I did not do the scene, I was going to get sued for lots of money." Quote, "I told them to stop and they wouldn't stop until I started to cry and ruin the scene." Quote, "He told me that I had to do it, and if I can't, he would charge me and I would lose any other bookings I had because it would make his agency look bad." Now, none of these quotes were from someone who was chained up in a room. None of them were from victims being beaten into submission or held at gunpoint. Each one of these actors drove home at the end of a shoot and collected a paycheck. But does this sound like consent, or does this sound like coercion? This aspect of the porn world is so common you don't even have to go to an anti-pornography website or talk to ex-porn performers to hear about it. Current porn performers tell the same stories. It speaks volumes about the culture and expectations of the porn industry that often, when you hear the same complaints from people still inside the business, they frame them in terms of an unprofessional agent, director, or actor. Modern sex trafficking shares a variety of symbiotic connections to pornography. Often, they're one and the same. One industry fuels the fire of the other. The connection between sex trafficking and porn is a subject not to be taken lightly. We will now hear from Simon Kisby, as he will get into how pornography creates a demand for child pornography and exploitation.
Many people who consume pornography have no idea what they're consuming. There's no way to verify the age of the people in the content you're watching, and sometimes people even seek out illegal pornography on purpose. The FBI estimates that at any given time, there are 750,000 child predators on the internet. They use websites on the deep and dark web to seek out pornography that exploits children. In the year 2014, Stephen W. Chase created a website called Playpen. It was focused on child pornography. The website was successfully operated for more than 3 months before the IP address was leaked, and the FBI shut it down. In those brief 3 months, almost 50,000 images were shared, and there were more than 150,000 people uploading and viewing this content. Chase was eventually sentenced and is now serving 30 years in prison. From the years 2017 to 2018, there was a 35% increase in child sexual abuse images, and that's just what was reported. There's likely much more that people haven't discovered. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the NCMEC, found that 43% of child pornography is produced by a guardian, neighbor, or family friend, meaning the biggest threat to children's safety are the ones closest to them. Child pornography is the fastest growing category on the internet, and the objectification that is present in pornography is undoubtedly connected to the objectification that almost always precedes acts of sexual abuse. 55% of children in child pornography are under the age of 10 years old, and 86% of the victims are female. Kelly Dorr is the director of the National Human Trafficking Survival Coalition and legislative liaison for the United Against Slavery. She has such a powerful effect on people because she had to live through the very experience she tries to prevent from happening. Her biological father, age 21 at the time of her birth, had a serious grudge against women. That hatred fueled his abuse of his mother and eventually of her. Just as she was turning 1, her father began to physically and sexually abuse her. Over time, he allowed his acquaintances to abuse her as well. Those illicit encounters became their little secret. He covered his tracks. He used grooming techniques and telling her this was her way to show him her love, that it is something that all little girls did. He also loved to use threats, telling her she would go to jail for doing dirty things, that her mom and family would be ashamed to know her if they knew how bad she was. Now, looking at Kelly as a young girl, no one would have known the force, fraud, and coercion that she lived with. She went to school, she pulled excellent grades, and she excelled at sports. But under that cool facade was a burning discomfort was growing, with what her father was telling her, what he was doing to her, and what he was forcing her to do with others. She decided to share what was happening to her in the way she was capable of at the time, with several adults around her, but no one intervened and nothing changed. 63% of sex trafficking victims say that they were advertised or sold online, and those numbers are just growing. Now, what could solve this problem? Obviously, this is an issue, but how could it be stopped? Contacting local officials and urging them to keep this issue in mind, donating to an organization that rescues victims, such as Operation Underground Railroad. All of these things are great, but what's the easiest way to stop this crisis? People need to stop watching porn. Stop consuming pornography, and especially pornography where the age of actors is unverifiable. By consuming pornography, you are directly contributing to the problem. Even when people watch content they know is legal, they're still giving money and ad revenue to companies who exploit minors and unconsenting adults. Now, not everyone watches porn, which is great. Stay away from it and urge everyone around you to do the same. Porn is very much normalized in our society, and that narrative needs to be switched. The porn industry has such an uncertain and illegal past, and we need to prevent that from living on to future generations. There are lots of things that you can argue about the morality of, but child sex trafficking is not one of them. There's seemingly no end to the plague of child slavery and exploitation, and something has to be done. My friend Dallin is going to discuss the overarching impacts of pornography on human rights. Current opinions about pornography vary. While some are arguing ethics, others analyze the data. Many point to particular parts of the industry as needing improvement, and others still argue that complete abolition or complete freedom is the correct answer for how we should respond to the pornography industry. Now, whether you stand by the research we've presented today, hold an opinion of your own, or just are becoming oriented about this subject, the statistical analysis that we've presented today proves that clearly there are some, and are likely to be more, impacts that pornography has on people and societies that are negative. With that in mind, whether you find pornography to be dangerous, if you find that it just needs more research, or even if you just want to improve the pornography industry, we can all agree there are certain changes that everybody can get behind. To have a discussion about those changes, let's review the harms and likely harms that we've discussed today. First, pornography is pervasive. It's found everywhere among all ages, classes, countries, and races. And as nations continue to develop, without intervention, this trend will continue to rise. Second, pornography is addictive. It changes the brain in the exact same locations and ways that drugs and narcotics do. Third, pornography contributes to mental health issues and is linked to many more. As we saw, the preliminary data demonstrates that there's a clear connection between pornography and people's state of mind, not only due to the content itself, but also due to its addictive nature. 4, pornography damages relationships. Because pornography is addictive and unrealistic, it destroys real, fulfilling relationships, and in some cases, kills the love that is found between people before pornography intervenes. 5, pornography perpetuates dangerous misconceptions. Most youth are learning about sex from pornography, which leads to an incredibly dangerous misconception about sex, such as what we discussed in point 6, that pornography objectifies people. It's used as a clear means to an end, which manifests in violence and shifting mindsets. 7, there's a clear connection between sex trafficking and pornography because sex traffickers produce pornography. And with that, porn creates a demand for sex trafficking. Because of simple supply and demand economics, we cannot defeat sex trafficking while pornography is still rampant. And 8, pornography creates demand for child pornography. Because there's no way to identify the age of the actors and the content that people are watching, child predators run rampant online, leading to illegal and, in some cases, incredibly disgusting content being uploaded without any way to check it. Now, of course, we came to the United Nations in a quest not just to identify problems or possible areas that we can improve in, but to solve them and actually improve. And to solve those problems, we can learn from the success stories we can learn from the success stories that we've seen in the past. There's an actual method about this prescribed by Professor Chip and fellow Dan Heath. They're professors who wrote books and were involved in a few things surrounding this subject. They prescribe the method finding bright spots. Essentially, where can we find success and how can we make more of it? So let's take a look at potential options of making improvement in this industry, first for individuals and second from the perspective of a world leader with policy. One example of a success similar to what it is that we're trying to accomplish in this industry can be found with a case study, or what the Heath brothers would call a bright spot. In 2007, the country of Tanzania decided they couldn't bear to wait any longer because they had identified a problem. The issue was that they had older men sexually preying on younger women with the use of coercion. While health experts call these cross-generational relationships, the common term for these men was sugar daddies. Sugar daddies bribe younger women into participating into sex, oftentimes unsafe sex, by using coercion and bribes. In exchange for financial help, school money, phone time, clothing, and the like, girls began to have sex with these older men. The problem was the girls were incredibly young, often 15, 16, or 17 years old. And to make things worse, the women in these relationships didn't have any leverage. When the older men, financially invested, wanted to participate in unsafe sex, the young women would have an incredibly difficult time refusing because of the power dynamics in those relationships. As a result, these young women were contracting AIDS and even dying at alarming rates. Ruth Hope's 2007 desk review of cross-generational relationships explained it by saying, however, even with the apparent agency in their actions, young women and girls may be vulnerable to exploitation in cross-generational relationships given the socioeconomic asymmetries in the relationship with an older man, and given the lack of choices facing those living in poverty, or the need to pay for school fees and purchase uniforms and school books. Or a 2007 Guttmacher Institute report finding that addressing the needs of youth therefore will be critical to stemming the epidemic. Malawi, in particular, has been especially hard hit by HIV. Fully 14% of 15 to 49-year-olds are HIV positive in Malawi at the time. Now, the current population was skewed towards younger people. About 6.3 million, or 48% of Malawi's 13 million people, are younger than 15, and 91,000 people in this group are suspected to be infected with HIV. Or we can look more broadly. In the age group of 15 to 24 years old, women in sub-Saharan Africa are 3 times more likely to be HIV positive than men in the same age range at the time of this campaign. What is it that explains this disparity? Well, older men are spreading HIV and other STDs to the younger women. These sugar daddy relationships exposed populations to one another that ordinarily wouldn't interact in this way. But despite these consequences, there wasn't a social stigma against this behavior in Tanzania or the other countries also experiencing the same cultural phenomenon. Well, Tanzania had had enough. To address the problem, a group of Tanzanians and a group of USAID organized experts met together in a hotel in Dar es Salaam. That group included Professor Chip Heath and fellow Dan Heath, whose perspective on the situation we're going to be examining today. The group's solution was both unique and instructive. Enter Fataki. He's the caricature that the group created in their ad campaign to combat this phenomenon. He was your stereotypical sugar daddy character, and the word Fataki is Swahili and translated imprecisely results in a translation of the word firework or explosion. And that's exactly what Fataki is, unstable and dangerous. In the ensuing radio spot campaign and poster campaign, the story of Fataki was told, and the people of Tanzania learned his name. Let's take a look at an example from the Fataki campaign that the USAID experts, the Heath brothers, wrote up in their book, Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. To examine that, we're going to be telling one of the radio spots as a story instead of reading it off as a radio spot. So with that, in the noise of a restaurant, you would hear the girl of the story pipe up. Oh, so many choices. And then Fataki would enter and say something along the lines of, please, pick one. The girl would say, waitress, is this chicken? And the waitress would interrupt, I recommend this one. Fataki would then break in, that's too expensive. Listen, give her the chicken and the chips with some sauce. That's good, right, my love? And the girl would reply, okay. As the waitress acknowledges their order and walks away, Fataki would remember, oh, please go tell her that this is a takeaway. And then the girl would reply, okay, and go and walk over to the waitress. Amidst the sound of people taking orders and waitresses replying, the waitress would whisper, I'm glad that I have a chance to talk with you alone. Don't you feel ashamed to have a relationship with such an old man? Here, take your chips and leave quickly through this back door. And as the door clicked shut, Fataki would realize something was amiss. He would say, "Waiter, what's going on here?" The waitress would reply, "Sir, the girl just went away. Would you like something?" Fataki would say, "What? I came with her. She went through which door?" "But you have not paid for the chips, sir," she would reply. And as Fataki was confused, she would break in, "Sir, this kid is not your age." At that point, Fataki is fed up. He would say, "Take your money and leave me alone." And the commercial would end with the same catchphrase every time: "Protect your loved ones from a Fataki." The story always demonstrated Fataki as desperate and gave a voice to the disapproval for cross-generational relationships in Tanzania. The results were monumental. People became comfortable speaking out against Fataki-like behavior, casually in conversation, or directly trying to resolve a situation. Their silent resent now had a voice. Chip and Dan Heath explained it. The results from the pilot campaign were unexpectedly strong. By the end of the 4-month campaign, 44% of the people who were asked, "What would you call a 50-year-old man who is always trying to seduce younger women?" spontaneously replied, "Fataki." 75% of Morogorans, the city where they test ran the program, reported to discussing Fataki with others. And the percentage of people who said, "I can do something about cross-generational sex," increased from 64% before the pilot to 88% afterwards. Having succeeded in Morogoro, the campaign was rolled out nationally in Tanzania, and the word began to spread nationwide. A healthcare worker setting up HIV clinics in the outer reaches of Tanzania reported that even in remote villages, Fataki had managed to bring a conversation out of the closet. Within weeks of the national launch of the campaign, the banner front page headline of a Tanzanian tabloid accused Kanumba, a popular actor, of being a Fataki. He'd been spotted checking into the Lambada Hotel with a young girl. The Tanzanian public had taken ownership of a name and a character who symbolized the bad behavior they'd resented quietly all along. Fataki changed the narrative. All it took to make important progress on this issue in Tanzania was a shift in the public perception. And we too can change the narrative, but this time the narrative about pornography. One excellent possibility in changing the narrative is informational campaigns, and that's something we can all agree about, whether we stand for or against pornography or simply stand in the grounds of finding more information so that we can be cautious about this issue. With that, we can look at the bright spot that was Tanzania and implement similar tactics regarding pornography, spreading accurate information, giving a voice to existing public perceptions, and addressing stigmas or a lack thereof as important ways to do this effectively. Another way that we consider that with pornography is that changing the public perception of pornography or reinforcing that public perception, depending on which country it is that you're in, is an important step that we can take to do this successfully. So with that in mind, my friend Mirabella is now going to present about what exactly that could look like in spreading that proper information.
What would that look like for pornography? Time to look at another bright spot, this time with changing public perception about an addictive and dangerous substance akin to pornography: tobacco. I believe pornography will follow the trend of tobacco industry in the public perception. Don Hawkins, executive director of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, said in a statement, quote, "Pornography today is pervasive and popular, similar to smoking in the 1950s. But as the harms become apparent, both the general public and elected officials will demand that a multidisciplinary public health approach be implemented across the country to address it." End quote. Let's take a step back to 1964, the year the United States Surgeon General's report for tobacco control was released. Up until 1964, cigarettes and tobacco were seen as a fashionable, popular way to relax with friends, and were even considered incredibly healthy. But all of that changed when the Surgeon General, Luther Terry, made a bold announcement to a room full of reporters. Cigarette smoking causes lung cancer and probably heart disease, and the government should do something about it. Dr. Anthony Komaroff, editor-in-chief for the Harvard Health Letter, spoke of his experiences listening to the televised report. He stated, quote, "I vividly remember hearing about the Surgeon General's report on the CBS Evening News. At the time, I was a first-year medical student. Between 2/3 and 3/4 of my fellow students were smokers. By the time we graduated, only 10% remained smokers. The report was one big reason why." And it wasn't just Dr. Komarov's colleagues whose lives were affected by the 1964 report. Harvard Medical School's reports the percentage of Americans who smoke dropped from 42% in 1964, the year that smoking peaked, to 18% today. According to their report, the decline in smoking prevented an estimated 8 million deaths since 1964, more than half of them among people under the age of 64. It was a simple solution to a difficult problem. All it took to save those 8 million lives and switch the public perception from acceptance to abhorrence was improved education, improved understanding of the health risks, the recognition of tobacco use as an addiction and cause of cancer. These factors were aided by the advent of legal restrictions on smoking in public spaces, mass media counter marketing campaigns, and higher taxes on cigarettes. We've already seen how pornography is similar in nature to addictive substances like tobacco, the way it impacts the brain, the addictive nature, and its commonality in negative health and mental health impact. Consider how you could help change the narrative about pornography, just like Surgeon General Luther Terry did. It is the same situation, and we can use the same solution. Dr. Anthony Komarov, who recounted his experiences with the public perception shift earlier, shared this following story. Quote, "I also remember the impression the report had on my mother, who had been smoking for many years. She wasn't wowed by the science or the weight of the evidence. Instead, she was impressed by the fact that America's top doctor was advising her and others like her to stop smoking. She didn't follow his voice right away, but eventually did." What this story illustrates is that a Fataki-like campaign isn't the only way to shift public perception and share accurate information. An outspoken leader can make a profound difference as well. But the fight isn't marketing and public perception solely. We can change the narrative on a policy scale as well. When it comes to changing the narrative and promoting information, it could be mounting a coordinated campaign in your country or region about the issue. Or it could be simply starting this conversation by making the negative impacts known. You could even implement policy requiring accurate information to be available in important contexts. Another excellent solution was presented by Dr. Jennifer Johnson, sociology professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. Dr. Johnson has dedicated her career to studying the effects of pornography on society. Her research has found that pornography is slowly deteriorating real relationships between partners, families, and even on a societal level. She is an avid believer that to combat pornography, we have to use creative solutions. Her suggestion is innovative. Quote, "On the demand side of the equation, I support the opt-in policy, which requires internet subscribers to ask for pornographic material to be accessible rather than the current opt-out system, which assumes the delivery of pornographic material is acceptable unless otherwise filtered." So let's break this quote down. When Dr. Johnson refers to an opt-in system, she is explaining a counter program to the present opt-out system available. The opt-out systems that are currently used are essentially system programs that you can download to your computer, phone, or Wi-Fi plan that you can use to block content, such as pornography, from being viewed. The key difference between an opt-in system and an opt-out program is that with an opt-in option, you have to choose to view pornography and specifically request it. The difference is the decision. With an opt-out system, you choose to block pornography. With an opt-in system, it is already blocked. You choose to have the power to access it. You have to seek it out to be able to view it. Creating an opt-in system would decrease the demand for pornography. When internet users have to make the decision if they want to have access to pornography when they handle their internet subscription service, it would greatly decrease the unintentional exposure to pornography that we see today. An opt-in system also sends a subtle message of disapproval. As Dr. Johnson said, the opt-out system assumes pornographic material should be acceptable, unless you decide not to view it. With an opt-in system, it sends the message that pornographic material is something that should be treated with caution. My friend Dallin is now going to discuss a final way that you can protect human rights and address pornography's trajectory.
There's one last way that we can change the narrative by starting the conversation. As we're all invested in finding accurate information and responding appropriately to this particularly concerning issue for people on both sides of it, there is a particularly unifying and important response that we can implement, and that is declaring pornography a public health crisis in the name of starting the conversation. This example actually started right here in the state of Utah. Utah legislator Todd Weiler pushed for Senate Concurrent Resolution 9, or SCR 9. It's a resolution declaring pornography a public health crisis in Utah. Weiler explained to NBC News, "I'm not trying to ban pornography. What I'm saying is we've taken steps to protect people from tobacco, but we haven't done that for pornography." SCR 9 describes the impacts of pornography, stating that pornography perpetuates a sexually toxic environment. It discusses the connection of the pornography industry to the trafficking of children and child pornography by stating pornography is contributing to the hypersexualization of teens and even prepubescent children in our society. And continuing, pornography equates violence towards women and children with sex and pain with pleasure, which increases the demand for sex trafficking, prostitution, child sexual abuse images, and child pornography. On the point of objectification, it states, because pornography treats women as objects and commodities for the viewer's use, it teaches girls they are to be used and teaches boys they are to be users. Overall, the bill walks through the dangers of pornography, the potential harms it is linked with. By declaring pornography a public health crisis, the issue was brought to the forefront of discussion. The impacts of this declaration was fascinating. In the 3 years after Senator Weiler made this bold stance, 15 states in the United States would follow suit, all the way from Pennsylvania and Florida and the eastern United States to Arizona and Idaho and the western United States. The narrative in this country has been shifted because of the stance that was taken by Senator Todd Weiler and the conversation that he's starting. With that in mind, this is a real-time situation that could help the United Nations and nations united in protecting their people spread accurate information about pornography. Because starting the conversation will help us to refine our ideas, find better information, and learn what we can best do to improve the pornography industry, protect people who are currently being harmed by it, and proceed with the caution that we need. In sum, pornography has been proven to have detrimental effects on people and society. and increasing research on this issue is showing that it is likely to be reached to more concerns. With that in mind, the face of such a widespread and dangerous industry demands that nations be cautious. We have to change the narrative, just like they did with Fataki and Tanzania. To change the narrative, we have to remove the conversation about pornography from the shadows and take action. What action looks like is entirely up to you. But one thing is certain. Acting now will be crucial in fighting for the protection of human rights, an ideal that the United Nations and each of us is devoted to. So we're inviting you to join us as we seek to root the unknown poisons out of our society in ways that we can all get behind. Thank you.